The cafeteria fell silent except for the sound of scattered lunch trays hitting the floor. Everyone watched as the girl with the white cane struggled to get back on her feet, her guide dog standing protectively beside her. The three bullies who had deliberately tripped her were still laughing, thinking they had won. But what they didn't know was that this wasn't just any guide dog, and this wasn't just any blind student. What happened next would leave those bullies running for their lives and change everything anyone thought they knew about underestimating others. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Isabella Chun had always been different, but not in the way most people assumed. At 17, she navigated the halls of Riverside High School with a confidence that surprised many who first met her. Her blindness, caused by a rare genetic condition that had taken her sight gradually throughout childhood, had never been something she saw as a limitation. But the students at Riverside High didn't see it that way. The school itself was a sprawling, modern complex in suburban Ohio, with wide corridors designed to accommodate students with disabilities. Isabella had transferred there 6 months ago when her military father, Colonel James Chun, had been stationed at the nearby Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The transition had been challenging, not because of her blindness, but because of how others reacted to it. Every morning, Isabella would arrive at school with Atlas, her 2-year-old German Shepherd guide dog. Atlas was magnificent, sleek black and tan coat, intelligent amber eyes, and a bearing that commanded respect. Most students gave them a wide berth, unsure how to interact with a guide dog team, but Isabella preferred it that way. She had learned early in life that people's discomfort with her blindness often revealed more about them than about her. Chun family had always been about discipline and excellence. Colonel Chun had served 3 tours overseas, and Isabella's mother, Dr. Sarah Chun, was a pediatric surgeon at the base hospital. They had raised Isabella with the understanding that obstacles were meant to be overcome, not avoided. When Isabella had begun losing her sight at age 12, her parents had immediately enrolled her in orientation and mobility training, ensuring she would never see herself as helpless. But it was Isabella's own determination that had led her to pursue something most people would consider impossible for someone with her condition. 3 years ago, she had convinced her parents to let her work with a specialized trainer who prepared dogs for both guide work and personal protection. Atlas wasn't just trained to navigate obstacles and disobey dangerous commands. He had been trained in controlled aggression techniques, typically reserved for law enforcement and military working dogs. The training had been Isabella's idea. She had researched extensively, using screen reading software to pore over articles about guide dog training, personal protection, and the legal rights of people with disabilities. She had discovered that while guide dogs were trained to be gentle and non-aggressive, there were specialized programs that could teach them to respond to genuine threats against their handlers. The training was expensive, intensive, and not widely available, but Isabella had been determined. Colonel Chun had initially been skeptical. "Isabella, honey, guide dogs are supposed to be calm and non-reactive. You don't want Atlas to be aggressive." But Isabella had done her homework. "Dad, I'm not talking about making him aggressive. I'm talking about giving him the ability to protect me if someone tries to hurt me. There's a difference between aggression and protection." Dr. Chun had been more supportive. As a surgeon, she understood the importance of being prepared for any scenario. If Isabella wants to take steps to protect herself, and if it's legal and safe, then I think we should consider it. The training had taken 8 months. Isabella and Atlas had worked with Marcus Rodriguez, a former Marine dog handler who specialized in dual-purpose training. Marcus had been impressed by Isabella's dedication and Atlas's intelligence. The dog had learned to differentiate between normal social interactions and genuine threats. He could respond to specific commands from Isabella, but more importantly, He could assess situations independently and react accordingly. Most people don't understand, Marcus had explained during one of their sessions, that dogs are naturally protective of their pack. We're not teaching Atlas to be aggressive, we're teaching him to channel his natural instincts appropriately. The training included scenarios where Atlas would need to create distance between Isabella and potential threats, how to respond to different types of commands, and how to de-escalate situations through his presence alone. Most importantly, Atlas learned to read Isabella's stress levels and respond accordingly. At Riverside High, Isabella had kept this aspect of Atlas's training private. To her classmates and teachers, Atlas was simply her guide dog, helpful, friendly, and well-behaved. Isabella used a traditional white cane in conjunction with Atlas's guidance, a technique that provided her with maximum independence and mobility. She had become proficient at navigating the school's complex layout, memorizing not just the obvious routes, but also alternative paths and shortcuts. Her academic performance was exceptional. Isabella had maintained a 4.0 GPA despite the challenges of transferring schools mid-year. She was particularly gifted in mathematics and science, subjects where her blindness posed fewer obstacles. Her teachers had quickly learned that Isabella needed no special accommodations beyond the standard ones: extended time for tests when necessary, materials in alternative formats, and access to assistive technology. But social integration had proven more challenging. Isabella had tried to join various clubs and activities, but she often found herself excluded in subtle ways. Conversations would stop when she approached, not out of malice, but out of uncertainty. Students didn't know how to include her in discussions about visual things, movies, fashion, social media posts. Isabella had learned to navigate these situations with grace, often being the first to break the ice with humor or by asking direct questions about what people were discussing. There were a few students who had made genuine efforts to befriend her. Rachel Martinez, a junior in Isabella's AP chemistry class, had been particularly kind. Rachel had visual impairment herself, though not to the extent of blindness, and she understood some of the challenges Isabella faced. They had formed a study partnership that had evolved into a friendship. "You're different from what I expected," Rachel had told Isabella during one of their study sessions at the public library near the school. "Different how?" Isabella had asked, curious rather than offended. "I don't know. When I first saw you with Atlas, I thought you'd be I guess more fragile, but you're actually pretty tough." Isabella had smiled. "My parents are in the military and medical fields. Fragile isn't really an option in my family." But not all interactions had been positive. There was a group of students who seemed to view Isabella as an easy target. They weren't obviously cruel, they were too sophisticated for that. Instead, they engaged in what Isabella had come to think of as subtle terrorism. They would move chairs slightly out of place when they saw her coming, hoping she would bump into them. They would speak in exaggerated loud voices when addressing her, as if blindness affected hearing. They would ask intrusive questions about her condition, often in front of other students. The ringleader was Tyler Morrison, a senior whose father was a prominent local businessman. Tyler was the type of student who excelled at staying just below the radar of adult attention while making life miserable for those he considered beneath him. He was joined by his girlfriend, Amanda Walsh, whose family had money and influence in the community, and their friend Kevin Brooks, who seemed to go along with whatever Tyler suggested. Isabella had tried to handle their behavior with the same grace she applied to other social challenges. She ignored their comments, refused to react to their provocations, and focused on her studies and her friendship with Rachel. But she had also begun to notice that their behavior was escalating. What had started as minor inconveniences had begun to feel more deliberate, more targeted. Atlas had noticed too. Isabella could feel the tension in his harness when they were around, the way his head would turn slightly toward them, even when they weren't speaking. Dogs, Isabella knew, were excellent judges of character, and Atlas's reactions told her everything she needed to know about Tyler and his friends. The situation had come to a head 3 weeks ago in the library. Isabella had been working on a research project using the computer terminal equipped with screen reading software. Tyler and his friends had chosen to study at a nearby table, speaking just loudly enough for Isabella to hear their comments. "I don't understand why she doesn't just go to a special school," Amanda had said, her voice carrying the particular tone of someone who wanted to be overheard. "My dad says it's because of some lawsuit or something," Tyler had replied. "Schools have to take anyone now, even if they can't really participate. It's not fair to the dog," Kevin had added. "It has to work all the time instead of just being a regular dog." Isabella had continued working, her fingers moving steadily across the keyboard, but Atlas had shifted beside her. She had felt his attention focus on the table where the 3 students sat, and she had placed a gentle hand on his head, a signal for him to relax. But the comments had continued, becoming more pointed and personal. They had begun to speculate about Isabella's family, her previous school, and her abilities. The conversation had been designed to hurt, and Isabella had to admit that it was working. She had finished her research quickly and left the library, but not before she had heard Tyler say, "She probably can't even tell we're talking about her." That night, Isabella had talked to her parents about the situation. Colonel Chun had been ready to march to the school immediately, but Isabella had asked him to wait. "I want to try to handle this myself first," she had said. "If I can't, then we'll involve the school administration." Dr. Chun had been more pragmatic. "Isabella, honey, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. If these students are harassing you, it's the school's responsibility to address it." "I know, Mom, but I also know that if I can't learn to handle situations like this, I'll face them my whole life. I want to try." Isabella had decided to focus on building positive relationships with other students while avoiding Tyler and his friends as much as possible. She had joined the school's peer tutoring program, offering help in mathematics and science to students who were struggling. She had also started eating lunch with Rachel and a few other students who had welcomed her into their group. But avoiding Tyler, Amanda, and Kevin had proven more difficult than she had anticipated. They seemed to have made targeting her into a hobby, appearing wherever she was and making comments designed to undermine her confidence. They had begun to test boundaries, seeing how far they could push before she would react. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The incidents had become more frequent and more obvious. Just last week, Tyler had accidentally kicked Atlas while walking past them in the hallway. The week before that, Amanda had moved Isabella's cane while she was in class, leaving her to search for it when she returned. Kevin had taken to making barking sounds when he saw them, thinking he was clever and original. Isabella had documented each incident, writing detailed descriptions in her journal. She had also begun to notice patterns in their behavior, understanding that they were testing her limits and looking for reactions. She had remained calm and professional, but she had also begun to prepare for the possibility that the situation would escalate beyond mere annoyance. Atlas had been watching too. Isabella could feel his growing awareness of the 3 students. The way he would tense slightly when they were nearby, the way his ears would perk up when he heard their voices. She had continued to signal him to remain calm, but she had also begun to wonder if that was the right approach. The specialized training Atlas had received included specific protocols for different types of threats. He could differentiate between accidental contact and intentional aggression, between normal social interaction and harassment. Isabella had never needed to use these skills, but she had practiced the commands regularly, ensuring that both she and Atlas remained sharp. Now, as she sat in her first period English class, Isabella reflected on how the situation had developed. She had tried to handle Tyler and his friends with patience and grace, but she was beginning to realize that some people mistook kindness for weakness. She had hoped that her academic success and quiet confidence would eventually earn their respect. But it seemed to have had the opposite effect. Mrs. Patterson, the English teacher, was discussing the themes in To Kill a Mockingbird, and Isabella found herself thinking about the parallels between the novel's exploration of prejudice and her own experiences. She had always been an excellent student, but lately, she had found herself distracted by the social dynamics at school. Isabella, what do you think about Atticus Finch's approach to dealing with the hostility he faces? Mrs. Patterson asked, drawing Isabella back to the discussion. Isabella considered the question carefully. I think Atticus believed that dignity and principle were more important than immediate results. He tried to do the right thing even when it wasn't popular or easy. And do you think that approach was effective? In the short term, no. But in the long term, yes. Sometimes standing up for what's right requires patience and persistence, even when it seems like nothing is changing. Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. But Isabella found herself wondering if she really believed her own words. Was patience always the right approach? Or were there times when more direct action was necessary? The bell rang, signaling the end of the first period, and Isabella gathered her materials. As she and Atlas prepared to leave the classroom, she heard Tyler's voice from the hallway. Come on, guys. Let's go watch the blind girl try to find her locker. Isabella felt Atlas tense beside her, and she realized that the time for patience might be running out. The morning sun filtered through the large windows of Riverside High's main corridor as Isabella navigated toward her second period advanced chemistry class. Atlas moved with practiced precision beside her, his harness providing the subtle guidance she had learned to read like a language. The hallway buzzed with the typical energy of students transitioning between classes, but Isabella sensed something different in the atmosphere today. She had developed an acute awareness of social dynamics over the years, compensating for her lack of sight with heightened attention to voices, footsteps, and the subtle changes in conversation patterns that occurred when she passed by. Today, there seemed to be an undercurrent of anticipation, as if students were waiting for something to happen. Morning, Isabella, came Rachel's familiar voice as she fell into step beside her. Hey Rachel, how was your weekend? Good, but I've got some news you might not want to hear. Rachel's voice carried a note of concern that made Isabella's stomach tighten. What kind of news? I heard Tyler and his crew talking in the parking lot this morning. They were planning something for today. I couldn't hear all the details, but they seemed pretty excited about whatever they had in mind. Isabella felt Atlas's pace steady beside her, a reminder of the calm strength she could draw upon. Did you hear anything specific? Just fragments. Something about the cafeteria and making sure everyone would see. Isabella, maybe you should eat lunch somewhere else today. Isabella considered this suggestion as they walked. The rational part of her mind recognized that avoiding the cafeteria would be the smart move. But another part of her, the part that had been shaped by years of military family discipline and her mother's surgical precision, rebelled against the idea of hiding. I appreciate the warning, but I'm not going to change my routine because of Tyler Morrison. Rachel was quiet for a moment. I know you're tough, Isabella, but these guys, they're not just annoying anymore, they're getting mean. Really mean. Isabella had noticed the shift too. What had started as juvenile behavior had begun to feel more calculated, more malicious. Tyler and his friends had moved beyond simple harassment into something that felt genuinely threatening. In chemistry class, Isabella found herself seated at her usual lab station, equipped with the adaptive equipment she needed for the practical work. Dr. Williams, the chemistry teacher, had been particularly supportive, ensuring that Isabella had access to talking scales, tactile measuring devices, and other tools that allowed her to participate fully in lab activities. But even in the familiar environment, of the chemistry lab, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that something was building. She noticed that Tyler, Amanda, and Kevin were seated at the station directly behind her, and their conversation seemed unusually animated. "Today's lab is about chemical reactions and catalysts," Dr. Williams announced. "You'll be working with various compounds to observe how different substances can accelerate or inhibit reactions." Isabella began setting up her equipment, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. She had learned to organize her workspace methodically, placing each tool in a specific location so she could find it quickly. Atlas lay beside her station, positioned so he could see the entire room while staying out of the way of other students. "Partner, up and begin with the first experiment," Dr. Williams instructed. Rachel joined Isabella at her station, and they began working through the procedures. Isabella's knowledge of chemistry was exceptional, and she found herself explaining complex concepts to Rachel as they worked. "How do you keep all these formulas in your head?" Rachel asked, impressed by Isabella's ability to recall molecular structures and reaction equations. "I've always been good at memorizing patterns. Chemistry is just another language once you understand the underlying logic." Behind them, Tyler's group was making no effort to keep their voices down. Isabella heard Tyler say something about explosive reactions, and Amanda giggling in response. Kevin made a comment about seeing what happens when you mix the wrong things together. Isabella tried to focus on her work, but Atlas had begun to shift beside her. She felt his attention focusing on the group behind them, and she placed a gentle hand on his head, a signal for him to remain calm. The lab proceeded without incident, but Isabella noticed that Tyler's group seemed to be spending more time watching her than working on their own experiments. When Dr. Williams called time, she was relieved to pack up her equipment and leave the room. "They were staring at you the whole time," Rachel whispered as they walked toward the door. "I know. Atlas was tracking them too." Third period was American history with Mr. Thompson, a former Navy officer who had immediately connected with Isabella because of her military background. The class was discussing World War II, and Isabella found herself drawn into a discussion about the role of codebreakers in the war effort. The ability to find patterns in seemingly random information was crucial, Mr. Thompson explained. People who could think differently, who could see connections others missed, often made the most significant contributions. Isabella raised her hand. "It's interesting how being different can sometimes be an advantage. What looks like a disadvantage to some people might actually be a strength in the right circumstances." Mr. Thompson nodded approvingly. "Exactly. History is full of examples of people who succeeded precisely because they approached problems differently than everyone else expected." The comment drew a snort from Tyler, who was seated across the room. "Some differences are just differences," he said loudly enough for the class to hear. "Not everything is special just because it's different." Mr. Thompson's expression sharpened. "Mr. Morrison, would you care to elaborate on that observation?" Tyler seemed to realize he had stepped over a line. "I just meant that sometimes people try to make disabilities seem like superpowers or something. It's not realistic." "I see. And what experience do you have with disabilities that gives you this insight?" The question hung in the air, and Isabella felt the attention of the entire class. She had learned to navigate these moments carefully, understanding that how she responded would shape how others perceived both her and the situation. "I think Tyler raises an interesting point," Isabella said, her voice calm and measured. "Disabilities aren't superpowers, and it's not helpful to pretend they are. But they can teach you to develop different skills and perspectives. The key is not to let anyone else define what you can or can't do." Mr. Thompson smiled. "Well said. And that's exactly the kind of thinking that made the difference in many historical contexts." Tyler's face reddened, but he said nothing more. Isabella sensed that her response had frustrated him, possibly because it had been reasonable rather than defensive. After class, as students filed out, Isabella heard Tyler talking to Amanda and Kevin near the door. "She thinks she's so smart," Tyler was saying. "Always has the perfect answer for everything." "She's just showing off," Amanda replied, trying to make everyone feel sorry for her. "We'll see how smart she is later," Kevin added. And Isabella heard the unmistakable sound of him punching his palm. Atlas tensed beside her, and Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. The comment had sounded less like teenage bravado and more like a genuine threat. Fourth period was her free period, which she usually spent in the library working on assignments or reading. Today, however, she decided to seek out Mrs. Rodriguez, the school counselor, to discuss the escalating situation with Tyler and his friends. Mrs. Rodriguez's office was located in the administrative wing of the school, and Isabella had visited her several times during her first weeks at Riverside High to discuss her academic accommodations and social adjustment. "Isabella, good to see you. How are things going?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked as Isabella and Atlas entered the office. "Generally well, but I wanted to talk to you about a situation that's been developing." Isabella explained the progression of incidents, with Tyler, Amanda, and Kevin being careful to stick to facts rather than interpretations. She described the comments, the physical incidents, and the growing sense of threat she had been experiencing. Mrs. Rodriguez listened carefully, taking notes. "Have you documented these incidents?" "Yes, I've been keeping a journal with dates, times, and descriptions of each occurrence." "That's very smart. Have you talked to your parents about this?" "I've mentioned it, but I wanted to try to handle it through school channels first." Mrs. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. "Isabella, I appreciate that you want to handle this independently, but what you're describing sounds like it's moving beyond typical teenage conflict. Harassment based on disability is a serious issue, and the school has specific policies about it. I understand. I just don't want to be seen as someone who runs to adults every time there's a problem. There's a difference between running to adults and using appropriate resources when you're facing genuine harassment. What you're describing isn't normal teenage behavior." Isabella felt a sense of relief at having the situation acknowledged by an adult. "What would be the next steps?" "I'd like to schedule a meeting with you, your parents, and the administration. We'll also need to speak with Tyler, Amanda, and Kevin separately. If what you're describing is accurate, there will be consequences. I'm worried that involving the administration might make things worse before they get better." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded. "I understand that concern. But Isabella, these students are escalating their behavior. It's not going to stop on its own, and it's not your responsibility to tolerate harassment in hopes that they'll eventually get bored and move on." Isabella left the counselor's office feeling both relieved and apprehensive. She had taken the first step toward official intervention, but she also knew that Tyler and his friends would likely learn about her complaint soon enough. High school social networks were notoriously efficient at spreading information, and she doubted this would remain confidential for long. As she walked toward the cafeteria for lunch, Isabella reflected on the morning's events. Tyler's behavior in history class had been more openly hostile than usual, and the comments she had overheard afterward had sounded genuinely threatening. She wondered if she should have taken Rachel's advice and avoided the cafeteria entirely. But as she approached the lunchroom, Isabella made a conscious decision. She had spent her entire life adapting to challenges, finding ways to participate fully in activities that others took for granted. She had learned to navigate unfamiliar environments, to use technology that extended her capabilities, and to advocate for herself in academic and social situations. She was not going to let 3 bullies drive her into hiding. Atlas seemed to sense her determination, his pace steady and confident as they entered the cafeteria. The large room was filled with the usual lunchtime chaos, hundreds of students talking, laughing, and eating. Isabella navigated toward the lunch line, using her cane to supplement Atlas's guidance in the crowded space. She had developed a routine for cafeteria navigation that minimized potential problems. She would get her lunch quickly, find a table with Rachel and their friends, and focus on eating and conversation rather than paying attention to the general social dynamics of the room. But as she waited in line, Isabella became aware of a particular energy in the room. Conversation seemed more animated than usual, and she noticed that several students seemed to be looking in her direction. She heard fragments of conversation that suggested word had already spread about some kind of planned incident. Going to be epic. Finally someone's going to. About time, she learned. Isabella felt Atlas tense beside her, and she realized that her decision to come to the cafeteria might have been exactly what Tyler and his friends had been counting on. She was now in the most public space in the school, surrounded by hundreds of potential witnesses, at the exact time when they had planned whatever they had in mind. As she moved through the lunch line, selecting a sandwich and a drink, Isabella's mind raced through her options. She could still leave, find somewhere else to eat, and avoid whatever confrontation was brewing. But she also knew that leaving now would be seen as retreat, and would likely embolden Tyler and his friends to escalate their behavior even further. She paid for her lunch and began walking toward the section of the cafeteria where Rachel typically sat. Atlas guided her around the crowded tables, but Isabella could feel the attention of the room focusing on her. The normal buzz of cafeteria conversation had taken on a different quality, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. As she approached Rachel's table, Isabella heard Tyler's voice calling out across the room. "Hey Isabella, why don't you come sit with us today? We've got some questions we'd like to ask you." Isabella continued walking, but she heard the scraping of chairs as Tyler, Amanda, and Kevin stood up from their table. Other students began to turn and watch, sensing that something was about to happen. "Come on, don't be rude," Amanda called out. "We're just trying to be friendly." Isabella reached Rachel's table and began to sit down, but Tyler's voice cut through the room again. "I guess she can't hear us. Maybe we need to get her attention in a different way." Isabella felt the room's energy shift, and she realized that whatever Tyler had planned was about to begin. Atlas pressed closer to her side, and she could feel his muscles tensing beneath his coat. The moment she had been dreading and somehow expecting was finally at hand. The cafeteria had transformed into an arena, with every conversation tapering to whispers as students sensed the approaching confrontation. Isabella sat at Rachel's table, her sandwich untouched on the tray before her. Atlas lay beneath the table, but she could feel his heightened alertness through the subtle changes in his positioning and breathing. "Isabella, maybe we should go," Rachel whispered urgently. "This feels wrong." But before Isabella could respond, she heard the deliberate sound of footsteps approaching their table. Tyler's distinctive laugh echoed across the space, followed by Amanda's higher-pitched giggle and Kevin's deeper chuckle. They were making their approach theatrical, ensuring that everyone in the cafeteria would witness whatever they had planned. "Isabella Chen," Tyler's voice rang out, artificially friendly but laden with malice. "Mind if we join you for lunch? We've been meaning to have a real conversation." Isabella turned toward the sound of his voice, her expression calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Actually, Tyler, we do mind. We're having a private conversation." "Oh, come on," Amanda chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We're all classmates here. Don't be so antisocial." Isabella could hear chairs scraping against the floor as students at nearby tables turned to watch. Some were even standing up to get a better view, and she realized that Tyler had orchestrated this moment precisely for maximum visibility. "We just have some questions about your dog," Kevin added, his voice carrying a menacing undertone that made Atlas shift beneath the table. "Like, what happens if someone gets too close to you? Does it attack?" The question was clearly designed to provoke a response, and Isabella recognized the trap they were setting. If she explained Atlas's training, they would use it against her. If she downplayed it, they would see it as permission to escalate their harassment. "Atlas is a guide dog," Isabella said evenly. "He's trained to help me navigate and to respond appropriately to different situations." "Respond appropriately," Tyler repeated, his voice mocking. "That sounds pretty vague. What if someone was just trying to be friendly? What if someone wanted to pet him?" Isabella felt her jaw tighten. Guide dogs are working animals. They shouldn't be distracted while they're working. "But what if someone did anyway?" Amanda pressed. "What if someone thought you were being stuck up and needed to learn some manners?" The threat in her words was unmistakable, and Isabella heard several students around them intake breath sharply. Atlas had gone completely still beneath the table, a sign that he was reading the situation as potentially dangerous. "I think you should return to your table," Isabella said, her voice carrying the authority she had learned from years of watching her parents handle difficult situations. Tyler laughed, but it was a harsh sound without humor. "Oh, we will. But first we want to show everyone something interesting we discovered about you." Isabella's blood ran cold. She had no idea what Tyler thought he had discovered, but his confidence suggested he believed he had found some weakness he could exploit. "See, we did some research," Amanda continued, pulling out her phone. "We found some articles about special training programs for guide dogs. Apparently, some of them are trained to do more than just guide blind people around." Isabella's heart began to race. If they had somehow learned about Atlas's protection training, they might try to use that information to get him removed from school or to paint her as dangerous. "We found this really interesting article about protection-trained guide dogs," Kevin added, his voice growing louder so that students at other tables could hear. "Apparently, some blind people think they need guard dogs instead of just regular guide dogs." Isabella stood up slowly, her hand finding Atlas's harness. The specialized training had always been a closely guarded secret, something she had hoped never to need or reveal. But Tyler and his friends had somehow discovered it, and they were clearly planning to use it against her. "That's enough," Rachel said, standing up beside Isabella. "Leave her alone." "Oh, this is rich," Tyler said, his voice filled with mock surprise. "The blind girl needs her friend to protect her too. How many bodyguards do you need, Isabella?" The insult hit its mark, and Isabella felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. Tyler had found the one thing that could truly hurt her, the suggestion that she was weak, dependent, and in need of constant protection. "I don't need bodyguards," Isabella said, her voice steady but with an edge that made several nearby students step back. "I can take care of myself." "Really?" Tyler's voice was filled with false surprise. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you hide behind a dog and let other people fight your battles." Isabella felt Atlas tense beneath her hand, responding to the rising tension in her voice and posture. The dog's training was telling him that a threat was developing, and he was preparing to respond accordingly. "You want to know what I think?" Tyler continued, emboldened by what he mistook for Isabella's silence. "I think you're just another spoiled military brat who thinks the world owes her special treatment. I think you use that dog and that cane like props to get attention and sympathy." The cafeteria had gone completely silent now, with hundreds of students watching the confrontation unfold. Isabella could feel the weight of their attention, the mixture of anticipation and discomfort that came from witnessing social cruelty. "You know what else I think?" Amanda joined in, stepping closer to Isabella's table. "I think you probably can't even tell where we are right now. I bet you're just guessing based on our voices." Isabella turned directly toward Amanda, her gaze focusing with unsettling precision on the girl's face. "You're standing approximately 6 feet to my left, wearing what sounds like heeled boots based on your footsteps, and you're nervous because your voice is slightly higher than usual." Amanda stepped back, clearly unsettled by Isabella's accuracy, but Tyler pressed forward. "Party tricks," he dismissed. "Let's see how good your hearing is when there's some real noise." What happened next occurred so quickly that many witnesses would later disagree about the exact sequence of events. Tyler had planned what he thought would be a harmless but humiliating prank. He would knock Isabella's cane away from her, causing her to lose her balance and orientation in front of the entire cafeteria. But as Tyler reached for the cane, several things happened simultaneously. Isabella felt the movement through vibrations in the floor and Atlas's sudden alertness. She instinctively stepped back, pulling the cane closer to her body. Tyler, overcommitted to his motion, stumbled forward into the space where Isabella had been standing. In his effort to regain his balance, Tyler's foot caught on the leg of Isabella's chair. His arms windmilled as he tried to stop his fall, and his hand struck Isabella's lunch tray, sending it flying. The sound of the tray hitting the floor was like a gunshot in the silent cafeteria, but Tyler wasn't finished falling. His momentum carried him forward, and in a desperate attempt to catch himself, he grabbed for the edge of Isabella's table. His weight pulled the table toward him, and as it tilted, Isabella's bag and books slid off onto the floor. Isabella found herself in the middle of a chaos she hadn't created, but was clearly going to be blamed for. Tyler was on the ground, tangled up with her chair, and surrounded by scattered food and books. Amanda was screaming something about Isabella attacking Tyler. Kevin was shouting for teachers, and Atlas was on his feet, positioned between Isabella and the chaos, his body language having shifted into something completely different from his usual calm demeanor. "He attacked her," Amanda was shouting, pointing at Isabella. "The dog attacked Tyler." But Atlas hadn't moved from Isabella's side. He had simply positioned himself defensively, reading the situation as a potential threat to his handler, but not yet taking any action beyond protective positioning. "That's not what happened," Rachel said loudly, but her voice was lost in the growing commotion as other students began shouting their own interpretations of what they had witnessed. Tyler was getting to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and anger. "She made her dog attack me," he shouted, loud enough for the entire cafeteria to hear. "Atlas never left my side," Isabella said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "You fell because you tried to grab my cane. You're lying." Tyler shot back. Everyone saw what happened. But the truth was that very few people had actually seen what happened. Most students had been watching the verbal confrontation and had only noticed the physical altercation when Tyler hit the ground. In the absence of clear facts, different groups began constructing their own narratives about what had occurred. Mrs. Henderson, the cafeteria supervisor, came rushing over, followed by Mr. Peterson, the assistant principal. Both adults looked at the scene, Tyler brushing food off his clothes, Isabella standing calmly with Atlas at her side, and scattered debris across the floor. "What happened here?" Mrs. Henderson demanded, looking around at the crowd of students. Immediately, multiple voices began speaking at once. Tyler and his friends claimed that Isabella had somehow caused him to fall and that Atlas had threatened them. Rachel and a few other students tried to explain that Tyler had been harassing Isabella and had fallen while trying to grab her cane. But in the chaos of competing narratives, the truth became obscured. Isabella realized that the situation had developed exactly as Tyler had hoped. She was now involved in a public incident that would reflect poorly on her, regardless of who was actually at fault. "Everyone step back," Mr. Peterson commanded, his voice cutting through the noise. "Tyler, Amanda, Kevin, over here. Isabella, please remain where you are." As the adults began trying to sort out what had happened, Isabella became aware of something else, the way the other students were looking at her. Some appeared sympathetic, understanding that she had been the target of harassment. But others seemed suspicious, as if Tyler's accusations about Atlas being dangerous had taken root. She could hear whispered conversations around her. Double quotes. "Did you see how fast that dog moved? She single quotes has been lying about what she can do. Tyler was just talking to her. No way, that was an accident. Isabella realized that regardless of what the adults concluded about the incident, her reputation at Riverside High had been fundamentally changed. Tyler had succeeded in making her the center of a controversy, and the truth of what had actually happened was less important than the narratives people chose to believe. Atlas pressed against her leg, offering the comfort and stability she had come to depend on. But for the first time since arriving at Riverside High, Isabella wondered if her determination to handle the situation independently had been a mistake. The real confrontation, she was beginning to understand, was still to come. The assistant principal's office felt smaller than usual as Isabella sat across from Mr. Peterson's desk, Atlas lying calmly at her feet despite the tension in the room. Through the thin walls, she could hear the muffled voices of Tyler, Amanda, and Kevin being questioned in separate offices down the hall. The afternoon sun slanted through the Venetian blinds, creating patterns of light and shadow that Isabella couldn't see but could sense in the warmth on her face. Mr. Peterson was a fair man. Isabella had learned during her orientation meetings when she first arrived at Riverside High. He was methodical, careful, and genuinely committed to student welfare. But she could tell from his tone and the way he was handling the situation that he was dealing with something more complex than a typical disciplinary issue. Isabella, I want you to walk me through everything that happened today, starting from when you entered the cafeteria, Mr. Peterson said, his pen poised over a legal pad. Isabella had been dreading this moment, not because she had anything to hide, but because she knew that her account would be weighed against 3 other versions of events. She began with her entry into the cafeteria, describing her routine, her conversation with Rachel, and Tyler's approach to their table. When Tyler asked to sit with you, how did you respond? I told him that we minded, that we were having a private conversation. And what was Tyler's reaction to that? Isabella described the escalation, the questions about Atlas, and the veiled threats that had preceded the physical altercation. Mr. Peterson took notes without comment, occasionally asking for clarification about specific statements or actions. Now when Tyler fell, can you describe exactly what you observed? This was the crucial question, and Isabella chose her words carefully. I heard Tyler moving toward me, and I felt vibrations through the floor that suggested he was reaching for something. I stepped back instinctively, pulling my cane closer to my body. The next thing I knew, there was a crash, and Tyler was on the ground. Did you intentionally cause Tyler to fall? No, sir. I simply moved away from what I perceived as a threat. And what did Atlas do during this incident? Atlas remained beside me. He positioned himself defensively when he sensed the commotion, but he never left my side or made any aggressive moves toward Tyler or anyone else. Mr. Peterson was quiet for a moment, and Isabella could hear him reviewing his notes. Isabella, Tyler and his friends have made some serious allegations. They claim that you've been hiding Atlas's true capabilities, and that he's not just a guide dog but some kind of attack dog. Isabella's heart sank. This was exactly what she had feared when she first heard Tyler discussing the protection training. Atlas is primarily a guide dog. He has received some additional training, but only for protective purposes in genuine emergencies. What kind of additional training? Isabella knew that honesty was her only option now. Atlas has been trained to protect me if someone tries to physically harm me. The training is completely legal and was done by a certified instructor who works with law enforcement and military dogs. Mr. Peterson set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. Isabella, why didn't you disclose this information when you enrolled at the school? Because I didn't think it was relevant. Atlas has never needed to use that training, and I hoped he never would. His protective capabilities are only activated in response to genuine physical threats. But you can understand why other students might feel uncomfortable knowing that. Your dog has attack training? With respect, sir, Atlas doesn't have attack training. He has protection training. There's a significant difference. He's trained to create distance between me and a threat, not to attack people. Mr. Peterson made another note. I'm going to need documentation of this training, including certificates, and a detailed description of what Atlas is and isn't trained to do. Of course. I can have my parents bring those documents tomorrow. Actually, I've already called your parents. They're on their way here now. Isabella felt a mix of relief and apprehension. She was glad that her parents would be involved, but she also knew that their military backgrounds might complicate the situation. Colonel Chun was not known for his patience with what he considered institutional incompetence. 20 minutes later, Isabella heard the familiar sound of her father's dress shoes in the hallway outside the office. Colonel Chun moved with the precise efficiency that had been drilled into him through decades of military service, and Isabella could tell from his pace that he was not pleased about being summoned to the school. Dr. Chun's footsteps were softer but equally determined. Isabella's mother had left surgery to come to the school, and Isabella knew that meant she was taking the situation very seriously. Colonel and Dr. Chun, Mr. Peterson said as Isabella's parents entered the office. Thank you for coming so quickly. What exactly is the situation here? Colonel Chun asked without preamble. Your call was somewhat vague about the details. Mr. Peterson explained the cafeteria incident, the conflicting accounts of what had happened, and the allegations about Atlas's training. Isabella watched her parents' reactions through their body, language and subtle changes in breathing that she had learned to read over the years. Let me understand this correctly, Dr. Chun said when Mr. Peterson finished. My daughter is being questioned because some students harassed her and one of them fell down? It's more complicated than that, Dr. Chun. There are questions about whether Isabella has been fully transparent about her dog's capabilities. Colonel Chun's voice took on the tone he used when dealing with incompetent subordinates. Mr. Peterson, Atlas's training was disclosed to the appropriate authorities when we enrolled Isabella in this school. If your administrative staff failed to properly process that information, that's not Isabella's fault. Isabella felt a surge of gratitude toward her father, but she also worried that his confrontational approach might make the situation worse. I have the documentation right here, Dr. Chun continued, pulling a thick folder from her briefcase. Certification from the trainer, veterinary records, legal documentation, and a detailed description of Atlas's training protocols. Mr. Peterson accepted the folder and began reviewing the documents. Isabella could tell from the rustling of papers and his occasional murmurs of surprise that the documentation was more extensive than he had expected. This is quite comprehensive, he admitted after several minutes. I apologize if there was a communication breakdown in our administrative process. The real question, Colonel Chun said, is what you're going to do about the students who have been systematically harassing my daughter. We're investigating all aspects of this situation, Colonel Chun, but I have to tell you that the other students are claiming that Isabella has been deceptive about Atlas's abilities and that they feel threatened by his presence. Dr. Chun leaned forward in her chair. Mr. Peterson, are you suggesting that my daughter should be punished for being prepared to defend herself against harassment? Not at all, Dr. Chun, but we have to consider the safety and comfort of all our students. Isabella decided it was time to speak up. Mr. Peterson, I've documented every incident of harassment I've experienced from Tyler, Amanda, and Kevin over the past several weeks. I spoke with Mrs. Rodriguez about it this morning, before the cafeteria incident occurred. Mr. Peterson looked surprised. You spoke with Mrs. Rodriguez? Yes, sir. I was planning to file a formal complaint about the pattern of harassment I've been experiencing. Why didn't Mrs. Rodriguez inform me about this conversation? Isabella heard her father's sharp intake of breath and realized that the school's administrative communication was even worse than any of them had realized. Perhaps, Colonel Chun said with dangerous quiet, we should have Mrs. Rodriguez join this conversation. Mr. Peterson reached for his phone and asked his secretary to locate Mrs. Rodriguez. Within minutes, the school counselor appeared in the doorway, looking confused about why she had been summoned. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Mr. Peterson said, "I understand you had a conversation with Isabella this morning about harassment issues." Mrs. Rodriguez looked around the room, taking in the presence of Isabella's parents and the tension in the air. "Yes. We discussed a pattern of harassment Isabella has been experiencing from 3 students. I was planning to schedule a meeting with the administration tomorrow to address it." Mr. Peterson's expression shifted as he began to understand that the cafeteria incident was not an isolated event but the culmination of a much larger problem. "Why wasn't this brought to my attention immediately?" he asked. Isabella wanted to try to resolve the situation through proper channels rather than involving her parents initially. "I was respecting her wishes while also ensuring that the harassment was properly documented." Colonel Chun turned to his daughter. "Isabella, how long has this been going on?" Isabella described the progression of incidents from the initial comments to the more recent physical harassment. As she spoke, she could see Mr. Peterson taking notes and occasionally shaking his head. "Mr. Peterson," Dr. Chun said when Isabella finished, "it sounds like my daughter has been the victim of systematic harassment, and instead of investigating that harassment, you're questioning her about defending herself." "Dr. Chun, I assure you that we take harassment very seriously. But the incident today created a situation where other students are now afraid of Isabella's dog. Based on false information spread by the students who have been harassing her," Colonel Chun pointed out, Isabella felt the conversation spiraling into an adversarial dynamic that would help no one. "Mr. Peterson, what would it take to resolve this situation? I want to continue attending classes here, but I need to know that the harassment will stop." Mr. Peterson considered the question carefully. "We'll need to investigate all the incidents you've described. If we find evidence of systematic harassment, there will be consequences for the students involved. But we'll also need to address the concerns other students now have about Atlas." "What kind of concerns?" Dr. Chun asked. "Some parents have already called, worried that there's a dangerous dog in the school." Colonel Chun stood up, his military bearing making him seem to fill the small office. "Mr. Peterson, Atlas is a professionally trained guide dog with additional protective capabilities that are completely legal and appropriate. If parents are concerned about their children's safety, perhaps they should be more worried about why their children are harassing a disabled student." Isabella could feel the temperature in the room rising and knew that this confrontational approach, while satisfying, was unlikely to produce the outcome she needed. "Dad, Mom," she said quietly, "I appreciate your support, but I think we need to focus on finding a solution that lets me stay in school and stops the harassment." Dr. Chun reached over and squeezed Isabella's hand. "What do you think would be the best approach, sweetheart?" Isabella had been thinking about this question since the cafeteria incident occurred. "I think we need to be completely transparent about Atlas's training, provide education to students and staff about guide dogs and disability rights, and ensure that there are real consequences for harassment." Mr. Peterson nodded slowly. "That sounds reasonable. I propose that we schedule a series of meetings with all parties involved, review the documentation Mrs. Rodriguez and Isabella have provided, and develop a comprehensive plan for moving forward." "And in the meantime?" Colonel Chun asked. "In the meantime, Isabella should continue attending classes normally. We'll make sure that Tyler, Amanda, and Kevin understand that any further harassment will result in immediate suspension." As the meeting concluded and Isabella prepared to return to class, she realized that the real test was yet to come. Word of the cafeteria incident and the revelations about Atlas's training would spread quickly through the school's social networks. She would need to navigate not just Tyler's continued harassment, but also the reactions of hundreds of other students who were now questioning everything they thought they knew about her. The next few days would determine whether Riverside High could become a place where she could truly belong, or whether Tyler's campaign of harassment would ultimately succeed in driving her away. The gymnasium buzzed with nervous energy as students filed in for what Principal Matthews had announced as a mandatory assembly on diversity, inclusion, and school safety. It had been 3 days since the cafeteria incident, and rumors had been swirling through Riverside High like wildfire. Some students claimed Isabella's dog was a trained killer. Others insisted Tyler had gotten what he deserved. The truth, as usual, had been lost somewhere in the middle. Isabella sat in the front row with Atlas beside her, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes focused on her back. The school administration had decided that transparency was the best approach to address the growing controversy, and they had arranged for a comprehensive presentation about guide dogs, disability rights, and the facts surrounding the recent incident. Principal Matthews stepped to the podium, his expression serious. "Students, we're here today because recent events have highlighted some important issues that affect our entire school community. We're going to discuss facts, not rumors. And we're going to talk about how we can all contribute to making Riverside High a place where every student feels safe and respected." Behind Isabella, she could hear the restless shifting of students who would rather be anywhere else. She had learned to read the mood of crowds through sound, and this crowd was skeptical, divided, and more interested in drama than education. First, I want to introduce Dr. Sarah Martinez, who works with the National Guide Dog Foundation. She's here to explain the reality of guide dog training and capabilities. Dr. Martinez was a petite woman with a warm voice who had worked with guide dogs for over 20 years. She began her presentation with basic information about guide dog training, explaining the rigorous process that dogs like Atlas underwent to become qualified service animals. Many people don't realize that guide dogs are trained to disobey commands that would put their handlers in danger. Dr. Martinez explained, "They're taught to assess situations independently and make decisions based on their handler's safety. This is called intelligent disobedience, and it's a crucial part of their training." Isabella heard murmurs of surprise from the audience. Most people had assumed that service dogs simply followed commands without question. Now, some guide dogs receive additional training in personal protection. This is completely legal and regulated, and it's designed to help handlers who may be more vulnerable to certain types of threats. Dr. Martinez clicked through slides that Isabella couldn't see but could hear being projected onto the screen behind the podium. The audience's reaction told her that the images were having an impact. Protection-trained guide dogs are not attack dogs. They're trained to create distance between their handler and a perceived threat, to alert them to danger, and to respond proportionally to different situations. They undergo extensive temperament testing and are only certified if they can demonstrate perfect control and discrimination. A hand shot up in the audience. Isabella recognized the voice of Jamie Peterson, a sophomore who had always been friendly to her. "Dr. Martinez, how can you tell the difference between a regular guide dog and one with protection training?" "You generally can't," Dr. Martinez answered honestly. "That's intentional. The protection training doesn't change the dog's normal behavior or demeanor. These dogs are still gentle, social, and focused on their primary job of guiding their handlers." Isabella heard Tyler's voice from somewhere in the middle of the gymnasium. "But isn't it deceptive to have a dog like that in school without telling?" "Everyone," Principal Matthews stepped back to the microphone. "Tyler, that's an excellent question, and it brings us to our next topic. Isabella, would you like to address the audience?" Isabella stood up, feeling the weight of hundreds of gazes. Atlas rose beside her, automatically positioning himself for guidance. She had practiced this moment in her mind for the past 3 days, knowing that how she handled this public forum would determine her future at Riverside High. 3 months ago, when I enrolled at this school, my parents provided documentation of Atlas's full training to the appropriate administrative offices. The information was there for anyone who needed to know it, but there was no requirement to announce it to the entire student body. Her voice carried clearly through the gymnasium sound system, and Isabella was grateful for the years of public speaking experience she had gained through academic competitions. "I want to be clear about something," she continued. "Atlas has never threatened anyone at this school. He has never shown aggression toward any student or staff member. His protection training has never been activated because no situation has warranted it." She paused, gathering her courage for what she needed to say next. "But I also want to be honest with you about why that training exists. Being visually impaired, especially being a young woman who is visually impaired, can make you vulnerable to people who see your disability as an opportunity to hurt you. The protection training isn't about being dangerous to innocent people. It's about having the ability to defend myself if someone tries to harm me." Isabella heard scattered applause from various parts of the gymnasium, but she also heard some uncomfortable shifting and whispering. "Over the past several weeks, I've been subjected to systematic harassment by 3 students who thought my blindness made me an easy target. They moved objects in my path, made cruel comments about my appearance and abilities, and yesterday, one of them attempted to grab my mobility cane during lunch." Tyler's voice cut through the gymnasium again. "That's not what happened. I tripped." Principal Matthews's voice was stern. "Tyler, you'll have your opportunity to speak. Right now, Isabella has the floor." Isabella turned toward the sound of Tyler's voice, her gaze focusing with unsettling precision on his location in the audience. "Tyler, you didn't trip. You fell. Because you were trying to grab my cane and I moved away from you. But more importantly, you fell because you underestimated someone you thought was weak and helpless." The gymnasium had gone completely silent. Isabella could feel the tension in the air, the sense that she was approaching something that couldn't be taken back. "You see, that's the real issue here. Not whether Atlas is dangerous, but why 3 students thought they could systematically harass a disabled classmate without consequences. You didn't fear my dog until you realized I wasn't going to be your victim." Isabella's words hung in the air, and she could hear the sharp intake of breath from various parts of the audience. She had just called out Tyler publicly, in front of the entire school, and everyone knew it. "Isabella," Principal Matthews said gently, "thank you for sharing your perspective. Tyler, Amanda, and Kevin, please join me on stage." The 3 students made their way to the front of the gymnasium, their faces showing varying degrees of embarrassment and defiance. Tyler's jaw was set in anger, Amanda looked like she wanted to disappear, and Kevin appeared confused about how the situation had escalated so far. Principal Matthews faced the audience with the 3 students standing beside him. After a thorough investigation, including review of security footage, witness statements, and documentation provided by Isabella and Mrs. Rodriguez, we've determined that these 3 students engaged in a pattern of harassment targeting Isabella based on her disability. Isabella heard murmurs of surprise and some scattered applause. Apparently, not everyone had expected the administration to support her account of events. Tyler Morrison, Amanda Walsh, and Kevin Brooks are being suspended for 5 days, and they will be required to complete community service with local disability advocacy organizations. They will also issue public apologies to Isabella and to this school community. Tyler stepped forward to the microphone, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "I want to say that I never meant to hurt anyone. I was just I don't know. I was being stupid. Isabella, I'm sorry for the things I said and did." His apology was clearly forced, delivered through gritted teeth, but Isabella recognized that it was probably the best she could expect under the circumstances. Amanda's apology was tearful and seemed more genuine. "Isabella, I'm really sorry. I was following Tyler's lead, but that's not an excuse. What we did was wrong, and I hope you can forgive me." Kevin's apology was brief and awkward, but he seemed genuinely remorseful about his role in the harassment. "Principal Matthews dismissed the 3 students and returned to the podium. The investigation into this incident has revealed some important gaps in our policies and procedures. We're implementing new protocols for reporting harassment, and we're expanding our disability awareness education for all students and staff. Dr. Martinez returned to the microphone for closing remarks. I want to leave you with this thought. Isabella Chun is an exceptional young woman who happens to be blind. She's not inspirational because she overcomes her disability every day. She's inspirational because she refuses to let other people's limitations define what she can accomplish. As the assembly concluded and students began filing out of the gymnasium, Isabella remained seated, overwhelmed by the mixed emotions of relief, exhaustion, and uncertainty about what would happen next. Rachel appeared beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. That was amazing, Isabella. You were so brave up there. I don't feel brave, Isabella admitted. I feel terrified about what will happen now. But as they made their way out of the gymnasium, something had shifted in the atmosphere around Isabella. Students who had previously avoided her were nodding respectfully as she passed. Several classmates stopped to speak with her, expressing support and asking genuine questions about her experiences. Marcus Williams, the captain of the debate team, approached her near the gymnasium exit. Isabella, I've been thinking about what you said up there. We could really use someone with your communication skills on the debate team. Would you be interested? Isabella felt a smile spreading across her face. I'd love that. Over the following weeks, the changes at Riverside High became more apparent. Tyler, Amanda, and Kevin returned from their suspensions noticeably subdued. Tyler avoided Isabella entirely, while Amanda made tentative efforts to repair the damage she had caused. Kevin seemed to have gained genuine insight from his community service experience, but the most significant change was in how other students related to Isabella. The transparency about Atlas's training had removed the mystery and fear that had surrounded him. Students began approaching Isabella with questions about her experiences, her technology, and her perspectives on various issues. Isabella joined the debate team and quickly became one of their strongest members. Her ability to listen carefully to opponents' arguments and respond with precision made her a formidable competitor. She also started a peer mentoring program for students with disabilities, working with the administration to create a more inclusive environment. 3 months later, Isabella stood at the same podium where she had confronted harassers, but this time she was addressing the annual academic awards ceremony. She had been selected as the recipient of the school's Citizenship Award, recognizing not just her academic achievements, but her contributions to improving the school climate. When I first came to Riverside High, Isabella said, looking out at an audience that now felt welcoming rather than hostile, I hope to blend in and avoid attention. But I've learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to be invisible. Atlas lay beside the podium, relaxed and content. His protection training remained a capability he had never needed to use, but its existence had taught Isabella an important lesson about the difference between being prepared and being afraid. The students who harassed me thought they understood what blindness meant. They thought it meant weakness, dependence, and vulnerability. But what they discovered is that blindness, like any difference, is just one characteristic among many. It doesn't define your strength, your intelligence, or your worth. Isabella paused, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. I want to thank Tyler, Amanda, and Kevin for teaching me something important. They showed me that sometimes the biggest obstacles we face aren't physical barriers or technological challenges. Sometimes they're people who are so limited by their own fears and prejudices that they can't see the potential in others. In the audience, she could see Tyler shifting uncomfortably in his seat, but she could also see Amanda nodding slightly, and Kevin appeared to be listening intently. But they also taught me that when you refuse to be diminished by other people's limitations, you give them the opportunity to grow beyond those limitations too. Isabella concluded her speech with a challenge to her classmates to look beyond surface differences and recognize the strength and potential in everyone around them. As she left the stage to thunderous applause, she realized that her story at Riverside High was no longer about surviving harassment or proving her worth. It had become a story about transformation, not just her own, but the transformation of an entire community that had learned to see ability where they had once seen only disability, strength where they had once seen vulnerability, and potential where they had once seen limitation. Atlas guided her down the steps from the stage, his tail wagging with the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. They had faced their challenges together and emerged stronger, proving that sometimes the most powerful response to those who underestimate you is simply to exceed every expectation they never thought you could meet. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.